Welcome to the CMO Spotlight, and I'm here with Jaime Punishill, who's the Chief Marketing Officer for nCino. Welcome, Jaime.
Thanks so much. Appreciate being here.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. I wondered if we could begin by your just telling us a little bit about the company and what does nCino do and then we'll talk about your role there.
Yeah, so nCino is, in the most simplistic terms, it's just bank software. It's how banks can run their organization. But they were really the first cloud native banking software. And started about 10 years ago, and true fintech unicorn, 0 to 400 million, basically in 10 years, in almost a perfectly straight line. Really solved some key fundamental challenges and issues that the banks have. And I'm relatively new. I've been here 7 months, so I'm still getting my arms around the place and the product. But it was the only job in my career where, when I got the recruiter call and I started poking around, literally to a person, everybody was run. Do not walk towards this opportunity. It's it's sort of theirs to win. It's a great company, great culture, great product. You'd be a moron not to take the job. So here I am.
Awesome.
I may still be a moron, but it wasn't because I didn't take the job.
No, I doubt that very much. So tell me about your role as CMO. What is your primary function? Now that you've been there 7 months, you probably have a little bit better feel for what the job entails. And I'm also curious about your team. What does that look like?
Yeah. So I am, I'm part of this smaller emerging crew of marketers who have are shifting sort of mentality a little bit and are using title Chief Market Officer. So we get away from sort of the activity and really focus on the outcome. And in the end, right, we expect marketing departments to be the voice of the customer, own the market. The view of the market, and we should reflect that. So I actually have 2 marketing teams that I've just brought together. We had bought a company called Simple Nexus about 24 months ago. And when I got here, they were still running as a separate marketing team, separate entity. So a good chunk of the last 7 months has been kind of getting my arms around sort of the process and how the 2 companies work together, et cetera. And we literally just reorged about a week and a half ago. So we've got a full stack. Integrated marketing, marcoms, marketing ops. I'm actually standing up a marketing ops function that didn't exist, an integrated marketing function that didn't exist, PR and a brand and creative function. So I've got about a 70-person team globally. I run all marketing efforts, all budgets centralized for all regions. And we've just reorganized around sort of a hub and spoke model. So our market strategy team is the face to the business, and then we have 4 COEs that provide global scale to power that market strategy team.
And you mentioned global a couple of times in the 70 folks on your team. So how distributed is the team? Are there, Europe, Asia, South America? Where are you generally?
Yeah. So we have someone in Japan. We've got somebody and soon to be another person in Australia and New Zealand, which is one of our faster growing markets. The bulk of the teams in the US. We have, I want to say 7, maybe 8 folks in London that were originally created as a discrete EMEA marketing team, but I just blew that up. So now we're going with regional marketing managers for each of the major markets in where we play in Europe, and we've taken the other resources that were there who all had great horizontal skills, and we've aligned them to the COEs. So instead of having a brand and a creative person just for EMEA, I've got a brand and a creative team that will support us globally.
Cool. So I'm curious about your career path. I know your most recent stop was at Lionbridge, which I'm familiar with because they do global translation and localization services and that kind of thing. But I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your path. It hasn't been a perfectly straight line.
No, it is. It definitely looks more like a drunken sailor path than a rigid march. I graduated in the early 90s, really as the world was pivoting from hardware to software, and I was out in the Valley. And so I like to think of myself as one of the older digital natives. Believe it or not, I actually had coded as a kid. I was one of those kids, and I thought I was going to be a computer science major when I got to Stanford, and then never actually ended up taking a computer science class. But what it does give me is I'm sort of the first generation of now executives, of leaders who grew up in a digital only age. And I just figured, I started in sales actually. I thought I was going to I wanted to be Jack Ryan when I grew up, and then decided that maybe that wasn't a straight path and I better get into business. And so I started in sales, which has actually served me really well as a marketer, because I've held a bag. I know what it's like to be out there cold calling and trying to drum up business. But very early on, I saw the internet coming and started to get really involved in sort of tech-enabled change inside of, I was at Bank of America at the time. And then the internet came along, and so they needed somebody to help guide their first internet project for the brokerage division where I was reporting in. So I led the first online brokerage platform build for Bank of America in the mid 90s, because I was 25 and I knew what the interwebs were.
Right.
Really, in that regard, I'm really a digital transformation guy. I'm really a business guy centered around digital and tech-led transformation, who's just kind of followed that, the ebbs and flows of the dollar and control over digital transformation. Sometimes that was in the business, sometimes it was in product, sometimes that was in IT, and really about a decade ago, marketing has assumed more of the mantle on that. And so that's how I found myself I became a marketer because I got hired to lead a digital transformation at TIAA in support of our first rebrand and first national advertising campaign. And really the digital strategy and the digital campaign that we developed was just better than the overall integrated one. And so the CMO asked me to take over the whole campaign. So suddenly I learned about all the other kinds of marketing. And that's how I got into, quote, traditional marketing. I actually think it served me well to not have come up through the marketing discipline, so to speak. I have no religion about how marketing's done or what it should be. I'm just a business guy, applying, sort of smart strategy and organization to a discipline. That is, how do we generate pipeline in the organization, right? Because that's really what it is.
Nice. So I'm curious if there's a piece of advice that you wish that you got early in your career, or maybe that you would give to a young marketer that's just beginning in their career.
Yeah. I don't know that I wished I would have gotten it, because I would have needed to know that I needed it.
Do you wish now that you'd gotten it then?
And even then, I don't know. One of the things I think that I've done well, and it's a natural predilection of mine, so it was easy to do, is I've taken a learning-based approach to my career from a very early stage. I guess if I had wanted some advice, I would have wanted somebody to help me understand how important it was to manage your career and not let your career manage you. It took me about 10 years to get that lesson in the first wave of layoffs that I went through. And I'm like, oh, I better actually grab the steering wheel on this thing, and not just be subject to the whims of others. But I think and I think this is just true in the world this day, but particularly in marketing, you have to be in constant learning mode. Right? I mean, what the effective tactics and channels, even from 2 years ago, are not exactly the same as today's mix. And they will be different again in 2 years. And so you really have to dedicate, I probably spend 5-10% of my week in some sort of learning mode, which is a lot of time. But I actually think it's one of the keys to me being successful and adapting and pivoting with the changes in the world has been that mindset. And that's really my my two pieces of advice: manage your career, so that you make, even though my career path hasn't been straight line, every move has actually been very intentional to add a skill set or to remove something that I perceived was blocking me from advancing in my career. And sort of that constant learning with intentional pivots has been, I think, one of the keys to my success.
So is that related to I believe everybody has a superpower, and I'm curious what yours is. Is that part of it, or is there something else?
No, I think that's it. So I get the best way I know how to describe my superpower goes to my very favorite review I ever got. I just started working for somebody in August. I'd only been working for her for 3 or 4 months. And this is how the review started. She says, "Jamie, half the time I don't understand what's coming out of your mouth. And I said to myself, this is not going very well as far as reviews go, first review, et cetera, et cetera. But then she said, the other half of the time, I appreciate that you take, one, that we have somebody who's thinking about this crazy stuff that we don't understand, and then finding ways to translate it into something that's meaningful and effective for what we do. I think that's, if I have a quote superpower, it's to see, what do they say about a great analyst? Look at what see what everybody else see, or look at what everybody else looks at, but see what they don't see. And I think I have an ability to see what's coming. You don't exactly know how and when, et cetera, but to see where the world is going and to tip my team and our strategies and tactics towards that in a way that keeps us in that edge, in that learning edge sort of innovation mode, which is just, it's a persistent competitive advantage because we're always doing something. We did this at Lionbridge. I could tell nobody else was really invested in SEO. And we did a big investment, 10 languages in SEO. And I got a call about, 18 months into it. And like, we just did an industry review. There's like you, and there's 100 million miles to everybody else. What's going on? And I said, well, I think we have a good team, but I honestly think we're the only ones running the race. And then everybody else will catch up to that. And there's a new race to run to create that persistent advantage, which is kind of how it all connects. That's why that learning becomes so important, because you're constantly seeking, how do I have an edge against everybody else that's barraging our customers with messaging?
Yep, I think that's great. So I'm curious where you find inspiration either for yourself or for your team.
So I'm religious about participating in peer groups and networking events. If for no other reason, it confirms that I'm headed in the right direction, or I'm going to learn some new things. And this goes back to spending time in information gathering and open mode, right? So I'm part of one peer group, literally 8 o'clock every Friday morning. Bunch of us get on the phone and we're sharing best practices, et cetera. And it's invaluable time. Yes, it's an hour I could be doing something else with, but it's an hour of me not thinking about the business, listening to others with a point of view or an implementation on a concept that's just a little bit different. And that's great inspiration. I try to read a lot, particularly non-marketing or non-financial stuff. Because it's always those kind of horizontal applications. What's going on in how is biotech thinking about the world, solving cancer, et cetera? There's always some way they're solving that problem that becomes really useful if you know how to apply it from one world to the other. So that's how I try to stay on top of things. It's hard, right? I mean, we're so overwhelmed with information these days.
But I think that's the analyst background from you coming out, which is where, consume different content to glean the insights that you need that are useful for you.
Yeah, and actually, this goes to, it's funny, because I actually think that goes all the way back to, I was a history and political science major, and I think that mindset comes more from there. And that has served me really well, right? I give this speech to my kids about why I think a liberal arts education is super valuable, because I can do anything with it. It's just a way of structured thinking and researching, et cetera. But I did have a boss once say to me, she's like, why do you read all that stuff? Like, especially things that aren't useful to you in this frame of reference. And, my response to that, and again, not everybody may be able to do this. I was like, Karen, I don't know. I can't tell you why, and I can't tell you when, but I know the meetings where I'm sitting there, we're having a discussion, and something I read 6 years ago pops into my head. And that was the moment in time that it was super useful. You can't predict when you're going to need it. So I just go with a strategy that says pack more in there and hope for recall, as opposed to try to know what you need to know. I don't think you can, personally.
Well, I also, graduated from a liberal arts university, and I think what I learned more than anything else beyond my majors was the ability to critically think. I mean, that's really what the goal of liberal arts education is, to teach you how to critically think. And that's useful in a number of different disciplines.
You bet. And it's whatever you think of Elon Musk, one of the things I appreciate most about his approach to the universe is first principles thinking. right? Which is truly like just keep unpacking until you get to the underneath all of the assumptions. So it's the 4-year-old approach to the universe. Just keep asking why to ad nauseum until you truly get down to the foundation stone. It's amazing what you uncover when you do that, but that takes a lot of work.
Absolutely. So I'm curious if there's certain values that you either want to demonstrate or maybe you would demand from somebody to be a part of your team.
Yeah. I hold myself and my team to a very high standard. And this phrase sort of goes both ways, but I'm generally not a fan of the phrase "perfect is the enemy of the good." I appreciate the spirit of it, but usually that means accepting mediocrity. Right? Because it's really, we don't need to make it perfect. Well, that doesn't mean that it can be horrible. And so I think setting the standard, doing the things that I'm asking my team to do. I pride myself in the fact that I can go pretty tactical with just about every member of my team in every discipline, from data taxonomies to SEO, et cetera. I'm not going to know it as well as they do, but I know it well enough to have good conversations, and I'm learning about those things so I can push them. And so I think that high standard, constant learning, test and learn kind of, iterative model. Those are really the sort of 3 key things. And I try very much to put my team in a position to execute. I say all the time, I shouldn't, I don't do real work. I shouldn't be doing real work anymore, right? My job is to set strategy and vision, get the right team in place, and organize them in a way that they can be effective, fundraise, and clear obstacles. And my team is super high functioning if I've done those 4 things, if I'm doing those 4 things, and they can just go execute super well. And when I have to do other things, that means something's not right inside of the system. So I try to set the conditions up and then empower them while holding them to a high standard.
Yeah, you brought up something that we talk a lot about, which is that early in your career, you start out as a specialist in something and an expert in something. And as you progress in your career, it's more about managing a team of specialists and experts and helping them, empower them rather than being an expert in everything, which you never could be anyway.
No, I think that's right. And look, I didn't think, I want to be a CMO someday, or I want to see anything. I want to do interesting work. And if you look at what seems like stranger career choices for me, they were always, I need to learn that in order to be effective or to drive this change or to lead this program or whatever. Okay, I need people management experience, or I need budget experience, or I need P&L experience, or I need ops experience because people think I can't execute, whatever the heck it is. And you're right, we've over-rotated on specialization, which one doesn't really help you. It gives you a natural career limit. But I think in today's day and age, I don't know how you specialize in anything, because you're just debating what your window is before your specialty is either gone, being replaced by something, or has fundamentally altered, right?
Yep.
I mean, look at what ChatGPT is doing to the SEO universe.
I was just thinking about that. Yeah. Although Google and others are scrambling furiously to counteract that by recognizing which content is created by a human and which content is created by a robot. But the reality is, it's going to change just the way we. At least it's a tool that can help us begin the conversation.
You bet. However it sorts, and that wasn't a Google will win or Google won't win kind of statement. I'll bet on the guys with a couple $1 billion in the bank as a general rule. But that said, it fundamentally alters how you think about content production, how, what the value even is of ranking and those kinds of things. It's going to change SEO. We don't know how yet, but there's no debate that it's going to change it. So if you're an SEO expert, right, and you don't have a good enough sense of where the AI is going, or linguistics and taxonomies, or the evolution of the page universe, you could suddenly find yourself with outdated information.
Yep. It also may change poetry and songwriting and art and culture and other things too.
Totally.
Time.
Have you heard about the David Guetta song? This is my favorite. So I don't know if you know David Guetta, right? He does a bunch of, pop and, EDM. So he went to ChatGPT and said, write me lyrics in the style of Eminem, and he gave it a bunch of parameters. Then he took the lyrics, took it to another AI system that mimics voices, and then sing me these lyrics in Eminem's voice. And then he took that lyrics that Eminem didn't write, but were in his style, with a voice that was like Eminem's, but artificial, and sampled it and put it in a song. Who owns the IP on that?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's wild when
Yeah.
you start to unpack what this is, this is going to do.
It is going to be fun to see how it all shakes out and emerges. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a little. So here at Setup, we are focused on helping marketers thrive by connecting them with the right resources and people that they need. And that usually means that we connect brands and marketing agencies together. And so we're not an agency, we're not a brand, we live in that space in between. So we think a lot about that relationship between brands and agencies. So I'm curious about how you have worked with agencies, either at nCino or even in a previous life. Just generally, how do you like to work with agencies?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I mean, one, I think that depends very much on your organization, your budget, your staffing, et cetera. There's no right answer on, do you use an agency, do you not use an agency, which kind of agency? That said, if you're going to use agencies, I think the most common mistake I see is not managing the agency, right? There's too much handoff or deferential sort of behavior, which isn't good for either side, by the way. That's just setting up inevitable discord and disconnect. I have been fortunate enough to be in organizations where both, I think the predilection was, let's do most of what needs to be done in-house and be very targeted when we're going to use agencies because of a market or a very specific niche or something we need to learn or what have you. And so that also lets me then be very selective about who we partner with and how we partner. I really have to believe that we're getting something tremendously more valuable than we would have gotten if we had done it ourselves.
Yeah.
And so, great example right now, we just did a brand positioning exercise. We could have done it internally, but I also knew it was going to be both more credible and more effective and faster if we brought in an expert. So we brought in Firebrick. And, in 2 months, we did what probably would have taken us 6 months. I think it, came out awesome. We were very careful about that selection. They were great and we're super happy. And so it's, easy to just think about those dollars and justify them. We're doing the same thing with a brand new website. Whole re-architecture. We're actually using it to update our visual signature. That's a good kind of epic, step function kind of value that I need to deliver to the business, where I say, I really want an agency for that. Yeah. That'll upskill us. We'll get a better result. We'll creatively push each other, and then we can go into run and, iterate and grow. So I mostly use it when I'm really looking for step function.
Well,
improvement.
Most clients or most brands utilize agencies because of a gap in capacity or a gap in capability, right? Like
that's right.
Just, you may not be able to have a full-time person on your team that specializes in some specific function that an agency does well, whereas they have
that's right.
4 other clients that person is working on in addition to yours. So I'm curious if there are certain disciplines or functions that you feel, these are probably going to be core to our business and we really need to own them on our team. And then there's certain other functions or disciplines where you said, I really want outside perspective. Good example with the brand work that you just did, but I'm wondering if there's a certain disciplines that you always like. Always is a strong word, that you usually would think external better versus internal.
Again, I think I think that totally varies by company. I think I don't want to give like a universal thing, we, for example, don't have great SEO in-house right now. I believe we need to have really good SEO, but I don't have it right now. And I don't know how long it'll take me to get it. So I will rely on agency to fill that gap. Even when we have then an internal expert, et cetera, that won't prevent me from using, having point agency relationships or projects, if I think I can get something out of it as a way even of creating a feedback loop. I think it's great to use agencies when you need to you think you're getting a little stale and you're more running than you are evolving and iterating, and that can again be sort of a great surge. But part of it depends on where you think you can internally get scale, or like PR is a great example of very tough to do all of that in-house and have this kind of same scale and relationships with the media. Like my PR agency is going to talk to the Wall Street Journal 27 times a day. We're going to try to pitch the Journal once a month. I'm making that up. Right. There's a place where there's almost nothing I could do unless I was a much bigger organization to close that gap. Now I have to have the agency.
Yeah. So I'm curious, as marketers, we often work with folks who are not marketers and that don't live in our world at all. And you described yourself as a business person that, leverages different tools in the toolbox over time to do what you can to help your company. But I'm curious how you demonstrate the value of marketing to the non-marketing functions within the organization.
Yeah, I think part of it, and that's why that chief market officer movement, I think, is so important, because it resets the discussion. I saw somebody did a presentation about 6 months ago that I was attending that I thought captured this well, that the marketing discipline is the newest of the C-level disciplines, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think is, we forget that you're really only talking about 30 or 40 years where this has existed. So you still have executives in companies who started their career before marketing was a thing. And it's a different thing, B2B versus B2C, tech versus
digital now versus traditional back in the day. Yeah.
You bet. So I think we overestimate, and we've got this duality. On the one hand, we overestimate sort of the length of this discipline, how many people have experience, in it, understand it, trust it, et cetera. Along with the fact that, as marketers, we all know, everybody who has two eyes thinks that they're a marketer, and should be able to judge creative and write copy. And of course, it's all belly button research. It's all how they want to be spoken to and sold and the rest of it. So that is a challenge. I really have, I think, focused my time and energy into not trying to educate them on sort of the mechanics and the KPIs and the things that we look at that measure our discipline, and really just live in, okay, here's how this impacts business, right? This is where we get to pipeline. This whole role, right? I am, a new CMO here, replacing the original CMO, right, who was here almost from the founding of the company. And the CRO had just felt like marketing wasn't it wasn't clear to them how marketing was contributing to pipeline and to revenue. That's a simple problem to solve. So I take that mandate very seriously in how I frame myself, think about the goal of the organization. That doesn't mean I'm not a brand guy. I will spend a whole bunch on brand, but I'm not going to try to convince everybody about brand's value and here's how we should measure, aided versus unaided. It doesn't mean anything to them. They just want to see pipelines growing or not growing. Here are the set of tactics that help do that.
Yeah, it sounds like the coming in, your focus was an attribution problem, really, right? Like you just needed to demonstrate that your efforts led to pipeline in some way, shape, or form.
We actually, it was bigger than that. There was no demand gen team when I got here. In fact, I sat down with the CEO on day 1 or 2, and he's like, "Hey, what do you think of our demand gen team?" And I said, "What demand gen team?" And discovered he was talking about the inside sales team. It was just the way the company grew up and the way the marketing function had been focused. It just wasn't focused on demand gen and pipeline creation. That was exclusively a sales activity, which was fine right until it wasn't. And so part of it is just recasting a lot of the work that we do. But a lot of when I brought the teams together was we had a lot of resources, but not necessarily where we needed to based on the company's objectives. So now I have a 15-person integrated marketing team. 6 months ago, there was no integrated marketing team. So, we really had just reallocated the resources to help hit the key company objectives. Obviously, we measure all the other stuff, but that's a discussion. I'll take a step back. I find the whole discussion fascinating. Like, no CEO tries to understand information security. at the same level as their CISO. They hire a CISO, they let them build an organization. So why would they need to understand marketing any better than they need to understand IT or the CISO?
Right.
That's almost a marketer insecurity thing. Yes, we want to be understood as strategic, et cetera. The best way we can do that is to be focused on the KPIs and the key objectives of the organization and footing our marketing activities to driving those outcomes.
Yeah.
I think we get a little about, this is what marketing is. So let's all do good marketing, whether or not the organization can connect to that or not.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're right about, everybody with two eyes thinks they're a marketer. And so they start adding salt to the soup. And then by the end, it's a salty mess because everybody's added a little salt.
And look, that's it. If you don't want that messiness, you're in the wrong discipline. So properly used, even that particular problem, that bug can be a feature if you know how to work with it.
Yeah. So I'm curious if there's a specific campaign or a program, either at nCino or in one of your previous lives, that taught you a great deal because it was a miserable failure and you learned something that you needed to learn, or it was a huge success and that maybe you'd like to emulate again in the future.
Yeah, hopefully this doesn't come off wrong. I don't think there's anything that's been a miserable failure, but that's because I've never believed, I just don't believe, I will have, my team is working together for the first time to put together, 12 and 18 month roadmaps. Here's how we're going to structure campaigns and messaging and how we want to develop. I think it's important to have those. But I guess this falls under a piece of advice. I look at marketing the way I look at GPS. You have a point of departure and a point of arrival.
Yeah.
And those things are generally speaking unchangeable. But everything between point of departure and point of arrival is subject to changing conditions. And so, I want to have that roadmap and that plan, but you have to build in flexibility and learning because things just change too fast. And I'll give you, this is a sort of a side, but a fairly tangible example. When I was at Citibank, the way we used to negotiate partner marketing, co-branded cards, was a very long and extended process, months, years to come up with a co-branded relationship, work through all the economics, et cetera, et cetera. And my favorite example of this is they had literally just finished negotiating the MySpace co-branded card. And in the time frame it took to negotiate that, 2 years, MySpace went from being the biggest thing on the planet to utter irrelevancy.
Yeah.
And you could just see where the business cycle was off of what was happening underneath. And so I can't point to a miserable failure because I never let things go long enough to be catastrophically off course, because we will build learning and adaptation.
So sometimes you have to know when to cut bait.
I think so. Well, we don't know what we don't know. I think this is I describe this as the difference between accuracy and precision. As marketers, we have a lot of data, we get a lot of research. It's precise, that doesn't mean it's accurate. And we confuse the two, and so we're too unwilling to pivot. Going back to the GPS, I get in a fight with Waze all the time. Waze wants to take me a different way. I've learned over the years, I'm never right. I'm never right. Always know something I don't know, even though I've taken that path before. I know that shortcut works. But Waze is telling me that shortcut isn't going to work today. Yeah. We're much like everybody with two eyes. Everybody's convinced they know better than the GPS. But I think that's important in the way we construct our programs and the way we measure progress and then pivot. If you're doing the constant pivots along the way as traffic and weather and other things change, then you've got it's just agile marketing. What I guess that you've seen the last few years is how many people said they were doing agile marketing or said they had done digital transformation, et cetera. And what we discovered was a lot of kabuki theater, but not a lot of actual transformation.
COVID exposed them pretty much.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of the things I was most excited about, at Lionbridge, I had been leading sort of this new marketing org and a big digital first, transformation. With some resistance, naturally, from sales, et cetera. And then the pandemic hit. And first couple of weeks, everybody's panicked. What do we do? I had our first offer in the market 3 weeks into the pandemic because we had so leaned into this new universe we were ready to go digital only. And I'm not saying that the world is digital only, but we could. And so we very early on, were right where our customers needed to be, way out ahead of our competition, many of whom who hadn't, executed those tactics. And we were changing those campaigns every 30 days because the market was changing so fast. And that to me that's pretty indicative actually of just how life works now. It was just a very compressed time. So that first sort of 6 months, which ultimately led to our 25th anniversary campaign, which we used to sort of redefine the whole company, the whole space, and reposition, and literally every campaign came off of that. All new content, the whole bit. And that was by far, we had our best couple of years when we were sort of anchoring those two things, but really playing by different rules than everybody else because we had leaned in to the digital channels in a different way.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so we're gonna wrap things up with a couple of quick hit fun questions that have nothing to do necessarily with marketing.
Awesome.
So I'm curious if there's a sports team or a book or a movie or a quote or a band that inspires you, and what is it about that inspires you?
Oh boy, what an interesting question. I guess the easiest answer there is, as a born in Massachusetts, I'm a lifelong Patriots fan. I think watching how Belichick and Kraft have managed the Patriots over the last 20 whatever years, right? Pretty inarguably the longest dynasty and the most flexible of the dynasties. Even if you look at sort of Tom Brady's career, and they've broken this down, you really have like 3 phases. There were 3 different Tom Brady, the quarterbacks. He was kind of a dink and dunk guy, and then he was a, wide open passing down the field guy, and then he pivoted again. That kind of adaptability and, changing the system to match the conditions and the competition and the market, not trying to force everything to adapt to your view of the world. That is, I aspire to sort of lead that way, but I think that has led to their success. So I use that as a lot of motivation.
That's great. I'm outside of your family, I'm curious where you find joy outside of work.
Well, there's a really interesting question. So I've recently become a empty nester, and sent my youngest off to college. And I have 2 in college, and I discovered how many hobbies I no longer had. that I had lost at swim meets and softball things, and things I had been hanging on to for a while. But anybody with teenagers, middle schoolers and teenagers know your life is not really your own.
No.
So with that said, I've got a new bike. I'm trying to get back into biking. I will pick up golf for like the 18th time and see if I can suck a lot less at it this time. I'm just starting there. I'm still 7 months into a new job and a lot of transformation. So
yeah,
now I'm in Wilmington and I'm by the water. So I'm sure there's some water sports and boating I can pick up too.
yeah, exactly. All right, so last question is there a brand that you've never worked on that you really admire? What is it about that brand that you admire?
Oh boy, I guess let me answer it this way. When I was I think there are companies I admire, which then allow them to be brands that I admire. So when I was at Citibank and I developed sort of early social media for Citibank, it was right when JetBlue was just flying high and Morgan was leading their social media efforts, et cetera. And it was like, oh, look at what a great job Morgan's doing with social media. And it wasn't that he was not executing well, he was, but he was dealing with a brand that was human by its very nature. Its culture lent itself to be incredibly effective to take advantage of what social brought to the table. And, at many companies, your brand, your company isn't that. It's not transparent. It's not authentic. And so now you're really trying to fit the wrong thing into the wrong medium. So honestly, part of why I joined nCino was like, if I can't make this place work, I don't think I deserve a job, because it's all organic ingredients and the right conditions and great product market fit and this incredible culture. So I think that's all you can look for, is where do you have the best conditions for success and where do you have great ingredients to work with. I applaud companies or people that can do a lot when they don't have all of that. But but I spent a long time trying to get to this place where, I've got like literally all the support and the tools and everything, and it's still now the burden is on execution. So that's how I think about it. Like I think, the Apple brand, which is really about the Apple company, right? We all get obsessed about their marketing budget or whatever, but that's because of key principles and cultural elements that the way that company runs itself. Those are the things that Virgin, which is all about how, Branson has sort of set up the universe and how he thinks about things, and that moves through the culture. So those are the kinds of companies that I admire, because you can see they've set themselves up for the conditions for success. It's still hard. You still got to execute.
It is interesting. All of the companies you mentioned have a strong personality at the head of the company, or at least did. I would say less so now at Apple than in the past, obviously the jobs, but who sets the vision and the culture, and then everything flows from there.
I'd even
so maybe
argue
that's the key.
No, and I think Tim Cook is, every bit the person, just a very different personality, right? You can make
profit driven versus product driven, maybe.
You don't have the scale. I mean, you think about it. I think about this all the time because, and at Lionbridge, we worked with companies like Apple, et cetera, on a lot of their launches. Think about the very first iPhone launch, right? They announced it in June for what you can get in 2 cities the following October, and it takes years before that moves its way through the system. Now they announce a phone in September, and 3 weeks later, it shows up in 37 markets.
Yeah.
And it's not just for sale in 37 markets. The units show up in 37 markets. In a week of each other. Like the immense global scale is just staggering. So you're right. The principles of the culture and the way they manage the succession plan and the leadership then permeate all the way through.
Yeah. All right. Well, so Jaime Punishill is not the chief marketing officer, but the chief market officer for nCino. Thank you so much, Jaime. This has been such an amazing conversation.
Awesome. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed having the conversation with you.